The night shift. Sarah had worked security at the Meridian office complex for 3 months, but she'd never gotten used to the building after midnight. 27 floors of empty cubicles and darkened conference rooms created an atmosphere that seemed to breathe with malevolent intent. Tonight felt different, though. The usual hum of the HVAC system had stopped around 2 a.m., leaving the building in an unnatural silence that made her footsteps echo like gunshots in the marble lobby. She'd already completed 2 rounds of the building, checking doors and windows, when she noticed something odd on the security monitors. On the 19th floor, a light was on in one of the corner offices. Sarah frowned, checking her clipboard. No one was scheduled to work late tonight, and she'd personally locked that floor earlier. She grabbed her flashlight and headed for the elevator, her hand trembling slightly as she pressed the button for 19. The elevator climbed with mechanical groans that seemed louder than usual. When the doors opened, the hallway stretched before her in absolute darkness except for that single rectangle of light at the far end. Her footsteps were muffled by thick carpeting as she approached the office, noting that the nameplate read Diao, Marcus Chen, psychiatrist. She'd never seen Diao Chen before, which was strange since she thought she knew all the regular tenants. Through the frosted glass door, she could see a silhouette hunched over a desk. Sarah knocked gently. "Excuse me, sir? Building security. I need to ask you to." The figure didn't move. Sarah tried the handle and found it unlocked. She pushed the door open and stepped inside, her flashlight beam sweeping across the room. The office was empty except for dust-covered furniture and filing cabinets. On the desk sat an old appointment book, open to today's date. Every time slot was filled with the same name, Sarah Martinez. Her blood turned to ice. That was her name. Behind her, the door clicked shut. When she spun around, a man in a white coat stood blocking her exit. His face was pale and gaunt, with hollow eyes that seemed to bore straight through her. "You're late for your appointment, Sarah," he said in a voice like rustling paper. "We have so much work to do." She tried to scream, but no sound came. The last thing she remembered was his cold hands reaching for her throat, and then darkness swallowed everything. The next morning, security found Sarah's uniform folded neatly on the 19th floor, but Sarah herself was never seen again. The office directory showed no record of Dr. Marcus Chen, and according to building management, the 19th floor had been vacant for over 2 years. The music box. Emma found the antique music box at a garage sale in the oldest part of town, tucked between moth-eaten books and tarnished jewelry. The elderly woman running the sale had pale, watery eyes that seemed to follow Emma as she examined the delicate porcelain figurine inside the box. "That belonged to my granddaughter," the woman said, her voice barely above a whisper. "She loved it dearly." The music box was exquisite, carved mahogany with intricate silver inlays depicting dancing children around its perimeter. When Emma wound the key, a haunting melody filled the air, and the tiny ballerina inside began to spin with mechanical precision. "It's beautiful," Emma said. "How much?" "Take it," the old woman replied quickly, almost desperately. "Just promise me you'll take good care of it." Emma brought the music box home to her apartment and placed it on her nightstand. That first night, she wound it before bed, letting the gentle melody lull her to sleep. But she woke at 3:17 a.m. to the sound of the music still playing, even though the song should have stopped hours ago. She sat up in bed, disoriented. The ballerina continued her endless dance, but something was wrong. The figure seemed larger somehow, more detailed. Emma could swear she could see the dancer's face now, whereas before it had been a smooth porcelain blur. The next day, Emma researched the music box online and found a newspaper article from 1987. A 7-year-old girl named Lily Thornton had disappeared from a bedroom one night, leaving behind only her beloved music box. The case was never solved. That night, Emma decided not to win the music box, but she woke again at 3:17 a.m. to its melody. This time, the ballerina's face was clearly visible, a child's face with dark, pleading eyes. As Emma watched in horror, the figurine's mouth began to move, mouthing silent words. "Help me." The music grew louder, more discordant. until it filled Emma's head like screaming. She grabbed the music box and threw it against the wall, where it shattered into dozens of pieces. The music stopped abruptly, leaving only silence and the sound of Emma's ragged breathing. But when she turned on the light, there was no broken music box on the floor. Instead, it sat pristine on a nightstand, the ballerina spinning slowly to that same haunting melody. Over the following nights, Emma tried everything. She threw the box away, burned it, even drove it to the other side of the city and left it in a dumpster. But every night at 3:17 a.m., she would wake to find it back on a nightstand, playing its cursed song. The ballerina grew more animated each night, sometimes stepping completely out of the box to dance around Emma's room. She would whisper stories of the dark place where she'd been trapped, of the other children who had tried to help her and failed. On the seventh night, Emma didn't wake up at 3:17 a.m. Her neighbors found her apartment empty the next morning, with no sign of a struggle. The only thing left behind was an antique music box on the nightstand, its ballerina spinning slowly to a haunting melody. Inside the box, there were now two figurines dancing together, a child and a young woman, forever trapped in their mechanical waltz. The substitute teacher. The call came at 6:30 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. Mrs. Henderson was sick, and Lincoln Elementary needed a substitute for her third-grade class. Margaret Thorne had been substitute teaching for 15 years, so one more assignment seemed routine. But when she arrived at the school, something fell off. The hallways were too quiet, even for early morning. The principal who'd called her was nowhere to be found, and the secretary at the main desk stared at her with glassy, unfocused eyes. Room 23, the secretary said in a monotone voice. Down the hall, last door on the left. Margaret made her way through the eerily silent corridors, her heels clicking against the polished linoleum. Most of the classroom doors were closed, but through the small windows she could see other teachers standing motionless at their blackboards, facing empty desks. Room 23 was different. When Margaret opened the door, 28 children looked up at her with identical smiles. They were perfectly still, hands folded on their desks, back straight. Not one of them had moved since she'd entered. Good morning, class, Margaret said, setting a bag down at the teacher's desk. I'm Mrs. Thorne, your substitute teacher for today. Good morning, Mrs. Thorne, they replied in perfect unison, their voices eerily synchronized. Margaret opened the lesson plan folder left by Mrs. Henderson, but the pages were blank except for a single line written in red ink. Keep them happy. Keep them fed. Keep them quiet. She looked up at the children, who were still staring at her with those unsettling smiles. Their eyes never blinked. When she moved to write on the blackboard, she could feel their gaze following her like a physical weight. Let's start with reading, Margaret said, trying to keep her voice steady. Everyone take out your books. The children moved in perfect synchronization, reaching into their desks and producing identical red books. But when Margaret looked closer, she saw that the books had no titles, no words on their covers, just blank red binding. As the morning progressed, Margaret noticed other disturbing details. None of the children had brought lunch, but they didn't seem hungry. They never asked to use the bathroom. They didn't fidget or whisper or display any of the normal behaviors of 8-year-olds. And they were always watching her. During what should have been recess, the children remained at their desks. Margaret tried to encourage them to go outside, but they just smiled and shook their heads in unison. We like it here, they said together. We like our teachers. Teachers? Margaret asked. Plural. That's when she noticed a corner of the classroom she'd been avoiding all morning. They, barely visible in the shadows, stood 3 adults. Margaret recognized one of them as Mrs. Henderson, the teacher she was supposed to be substituting for. The other 2 were strangers, but they wore the same blank expression as Mrs. Henderson, the same glassy stare as the secretary. All 3 of them were staring at her with those same unchanging smiles. We collect teachers, one of the children said, and Margaret realized with growing horror that the child's mouth hadn't moved. The voice had come from all of them simultaneously. Margaret backed toward the door, but it was already closed. She didn't remember closing it. "Don't worry," the children said in their collective voice. "You'll like it here. They always do, eventually." The substitute teachers in the corner nodded in agreement, their smiles never wavering. Margaret's screams echoed through the empty hallways, but no one came to help. By noon, she was standing quietly in the corner with the others, smiling that same blank smile. The next day, Lincoln Elementary called for another substitute teacher. Static. The old radio had been in Danny's basement for as long as he could remember, a massive wooden cabinet with brass dials and a fabric speaker cover that had yellowed with age. His grandfather had bought it in 1952, back when families gathered around radios the way they now gathered around televisions. Danny discovered it could still pick up signals while cleaning out the basement after his grandfather's funeral. Most of the stations came through as static or weak, distant music, but late at night, around 2 a.m., he found something strange. Between 102.7 and 102.9 on the FM dial, there was a clear signal. No call letters, no commercials, no DJ chatter. Just voices, different voices each night, speaking in conversational tones about mundane things. A woman discussing her grocery list. A man complaining about traffic. Children reciting nursery rhymes. Danny became obsessed with a mysterious station, staying up later and later to listen. The voices seemed to be having one-sided conversations, as if they were on the phone with someone, but he could only hear their side of the exchange. One night, about 2 weeks after first discovering the station, Danny heard something that made his blood run cold. "I don't know where I am," a young woman was saying, her voice thick with tears. "It's so dark here, and I can't find the way out. Can you hear me? Please, if anyone can hear me, I'm scared." Danny leaned closer to the radio, his heart pounding. This wasn't a casual conversation. This was a plea for help. "Hello?" Danny called out. "Can you hear me?" The woman's voice stopped abruptly. After a long moment, she spoke again, and her voice was different now, filled with hope and desperation. "Yes. Oh, God. Yes, I can hear you. Please help me. I don't know how long I've been here. There are others, too. So many others." Danny's hand shook as he adjusted the tuning dial, trying to make the signal clearer. "Where are you? How can I help?" "I don't know where I am. It's like being between places. Between frequencies. We all found the signal somehow, and now we can't get back." Over the following nights, Danny spoke with dozens of different voices. Men, women, children, all claiming to be lost, trapped somewhere they couldn't describe. They told him stories of finding old radios, of tuning into strange frequencies, of being pulled into a place that existed in the spaces between radio waves. "Don't keep listening," a man's voice warned him one night. "The more you tune in, the stronger the pull becomes. You're already starting to fade, aren't you?" Danny looked down at his hands and gasped. They were translucent, like looking at them through frosted glass. He could see the radio dial through his fingers. "What's happening to me?" he whispered. "You're becoming like us," the voice replied sadly. "Another lost signal." Danny tried to turn off the radio, but his hands passed through the dials like they were made of mist. He was disappearing, being pulled into the frequency between stations. The last thing he remembered was his own voice joining the chorus of the lost, pleading with the next person who would inevitably find the signal. "Please help me. I don't know where I am." Danny's parents found the basement empty the next morning, with the old radio still humming softly. Sometimes, late at night when the house was quiet, they could swear they heard their son's voice coming from between the static, calling out for help. But they never had the courage to answer. The perfect house. The Riverside house was everything the Johnsons had been looking for. For bedrooms, 3 baths, a huge backyard for the kids, and a price that seemed almost too good to be true. The real estate agent, M.S. Crane, explained that the previous owners had been forced to sell quickly due to a job relocation. "A motivated seller," she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Their loss is your gain." Tom and Linda Johnson moved in with their two children, 8-year-old Emma and 6-year-old Jake, on a sunny Saturday in October. The neighbors were friendly, the schools were excellent, and for the first month, everything seemed perfect. Then the children started mentioning their new friends. "Molly showed me where the best hiding spots are," Emma announced over dinner one evening. "She knows all the secret places in the house." Linda exchanged glances with Tom. "Molly? From next door?" Emma shook her head. "No, Molly from upstairs. She lives in the walls." Tom laughed nervously. "Kids and their imaginary friends. Right." But Jake nodded seriously. "I met Tim. He's my age, and he says he's been waiting for a new family to play with. He misses his mommy and daddy." That night, Linda heard footsteps in the hallway outside their bedroom. When she got up to check on the children, she found them both sound asleep. But in the hallway, she could swear she heard the faint sound of children's laughter coming from inside the walls. Over the next few weeks, the imaginary friends became a constant presence. Emma and Jake would have long conversations with empty rooms, play games with invisible partners, and set extra places at the table for Molly and Tim. Linda started researching the house's history and discovered something that made her stomach turn. 5 years ago, the Hendricks family had lived in the house. Parents and two children, Molly and Tim. They had died in a carbon monoxide leak while sleeping. The tragedy had been covered up during the sale, paperwork buried to avoid affecting property values. When Linda confronted the real estate agent, MS, Crane's demeanor changed completely. "You need to understand," she said coldly, "that house has very specific needs. The previous families who couldn't accommodate those needs didn't stay long." "What do you mean?" Linda demanded. "The children need playmates. They get lonely. As long as your children are happy to play with them, everyone gets along fine. It's when parents try to interfere that problems arise." Linda rushed home to find Tom packing frantically. "We're leaving," he said. "Tonight." "What happened?" Tom's face was pale. "I found Jake talking to his room, and when I asked him what Tim was saying, Jake told me Tim was sad because his last playmates had to go away. When I asked where they went, Jake said Tim showed him the basement. They went down to investigate and found children's belongings scattered throughout the basement. Toys, clothes, a small backpack with Sarah Chen written in marker. In the corner, partially hidden behind a water heater, were 3 small graves marked with makeshift wooden crosses. "We have to call the police," Linda whispered. But when they tried to leave, the front door wouldn't open. The windows were sealed shut. From upstairs came the sound of children laughing, 4 voices now instead of 2. Emma appeared at the top of the stairs, smiling. "Mommy, Daddy, Molly, and Tim want us to stay forever. They don't want to be lonely anymore." Jake joined his sister, his eyes glassy and unfocused. "Tim says we can all be best friends. We just have to go to sleep in the basement, and when we wake up, we'll never have to leave." The parents tried to reach their children, but invisible hands held them back. Cold fingers touched their faces, and whispered voices filled their ears. "Don't fight it," the voices said. "The children are so much happier here, and you'll understand soon. Everyone does, eventually." The next morning, the real estate agent placed a new listing online. Beautiful family home, motivated sellers, price reduced for quick sale. She made a note to start looking for a new family, preferably one with children. The Riverside house was patient. It could wait. The night photographer. Marcus specialized in urban decay photography, capturing the beauty in abandoned buildings and forgotten places. His portfolio was filled with haunting images of empty factories, crumbling theaters, and derelict hospitals, places where time had stopped and nature was slowly reclaiming what humanity had left behind. The Blackwood Psychiatric Hospital had been closed for 30 years when Marcus first heard about it. Built in 1902, it had housed patients until a series of scandals and budget cuts forced its closure in 1994. The massive brick building sat on 50 acres of overgrown grounds, and according to local urban explorers, security was practically non-existent. Marcus arrived just after sunset, his camera equipment packed in a weatherproof bag. The October air was crisp, and fog was beginning to roll in from a nearby river. Perfect atmospheric conditions for the kind of shots he was hoping to capture. The main building loomed against the darkening sky, its broken windows like hollow eyes staring down at him. Marcus had explored dozens of abandoned buildings, but something about Blackwood felt different. More alive, somehow, despite being empty for decades. He started with exterior shots, capturing the way moonlight filtered through the skeletal remains of trees that had grown up through the foundation. His cameras flashed illuminated patches of graffiti and broken glass, creating stark contrast between light and shadow. Inside, the hospital was a maze of long corridors and empty rooms. Marcus moved carefully, using his flashlight to navigate around debris and holes in the floor. The air was thick with dust and the smell of decay, but underneath it was something else, a sweet, cloying odor he couldn't identify. His first shots of the interior were everything he'd hoped for. The main hallway stretched into darkness, doorways opening like mouths on either side. In the old common room, chairs were still arranged in circles, as if waiting for patients who would never return. It was when he reached the fourth floor that things began to feel wrong. Marcus was photographing a particularly striking shot, an empty patient room with a single bed frame silhouetted against a broken window, when he noticed something in his camera's LCD screen. In the corner of the frame, just barely visible, was what looked like a human figure. He lowered his camera and shined his flashlight toward the corner. Nothing there. Marcus looked at the image again. The figure was clearer now, definitely human-shaped, standing in the shadows near the window. But when he'd taken the shot, he was certain the room was empty. He took another photo of the same scene. This time, the figure was closer to the center of the frame, and Marcus could make out more details. It appeared to be a woman in a white gown, her long hair hanging in front of her face. Marcus's hands began to shake as he scrolled through his photos. In every image, the figures were different, but they were getting closer to his position. Men and women in hospital gowns, standing in doorways, reaching toward the camera with outstretched hands. A sound echoed through the empty corridor, a soft scraping, like bare feet on concrete. Marcus spun around, his flashlight beam dancing across the walls. At the far end of the hallway, barely visible in the dim light, someone was watching him. Marcus ran. He stumbled through room after room, his flashlight battery growing weaker with each passing moment. Behind him, he could hear them following. Dozens of footsteps, whispered voices, the rustle of fabric against walls. When he finally burst out of the building into the cool night air, Marcus didn't stop running until he reached his car. His hand shook so badly he could barely get the key in the ignition. At home, Marcus downloaded his photos with trembling fingers. What he saw made him sick to his stomach. The figures in the images were clearer now, their faces visible. And they were all looking directly at the camera, directly at him, with expressions of rage and hunger. But it was the last photo that made Marcus throw his camera across the room in terror. It was a self-portrait he didn't remember taking, shot from behind him as he fled down the hospital corridor. And standing right behind him, close enough to touch, were all the figures from his other photos. In the image, they were reaching for him with grasping hands and open mouths, as if trying to pull him back into their world of shadows and decay. Marcus never developed another roll of film. But sometimes, late at night, he would look at those final photos and notice something new. His own reflection was getting fainter in each image, as if something was slowly pulling him back toward that abandoned hospital. He destroyed his camera, deleted the digital files, and tried to forget what he'd seen. But the dreams continued. Dreams of walking those dark corridors forever, becoming another shadow waiting for the next photographer to capture him in their lens. The last house on Maple Street. The moving truck pulled away from 1247 Maple Street, just as the streetlights flickered on, leaving Rebecca Chen alone with the boxes and her new house. After a divorce, she'd wanted a fresh start somewhere quiet, and Millbrook seemed perfect, a small town where everyone knew their neighbors and children still played in the streets until dark. But as she stood on her front porch looking down Maple Street, Rebecca noticed something odd. Every house had warm light glowing from windows, jack-o'-lanterns on porches, Halloween decorations hung with care. Every house except the one directly across from hers. Number 1248 sat in complete darkness, its yard overgrown with weeds that reached nearly to the first-floor windows. The house itself looked solid enough, but there was something unsettling about its vacant stay, the way it seemed to watch her even with no lights on inside. Rebecca spent her first evening unpacking and trying to ignore the feeling that she was being observed. Every time she passed a window, she found herself glancing across the street at that dark house, half expecting to see a face looking back at her. The next morning, she introduced herself to her neighbor on the right, Mrs. Patterson, an elderly woman who'd lived on Maple Street for 40 years. "Oh, you bought the Chen house," Mrs. Patterson said, though she seemed uncomfortable. "That's nice. What can you tell me about the house across the street?" Rebecca asked. Number 1248. Mrs. Patterson's face went pale. "We don't talk about that house, dear. Best to just ignore it." But Rebecca couldn't ignore it. Over the next few days, she noticed things that made no sense. The grass in 1248's yard never seemed to grow, despite the autumn rains. She never saw anyone going in or out, but sometimes lights would flicker briefly in different windows, never long enough to illuminate anything, just quick flashes like someone moving through the rooms with a flashlight. On Halloween night, Rebecca decided to investigate. She'd bought extra candy for trick-or-treaters, but none had come to her door. In fact, she'd noticed that children seemed to avoid her side of the street entirely, crossing over before they reached the house and crossing back afterward. At midnight, Rebecca crossed the street and walked up to 1248's front porch. The door was painted black and had no hardware, no doorknob, no lock, no mail slot. She knocked, and the sound echoed strangely, as if the house were much larger inside than it appeared from the outside. "Hello?" she called. "Is anyone home?" The door swung open at a touch, revealing a hallway that stretched much farther than the house's exterior dimensions should have allowed. Rebecca stepped inside, using a phone flashlight to illuminate her path. The house was fully furnished, as if someone had just stepped out for a moment. Pictures hung on the walls, family photos showing the same people in different decades, but something was wrong with the faces. They were blurred, indistinct, as if the camera had moved just as the shutter clicked. Rebecca climbed the stairs to the second floor and found bedrooms that looked lived in but felt abandoned. Children's toys were scattered on floors. Beds were unmade, but everything was covered in a fine layer of dust that suggested no one had disturbed these rooms in years. In the master bedroom, she found a diary on the nightstand. The entries were dated, but the dates made no sense, some from the 1980s, others from the 2010s, all mixed together in random order. Different handwriting filled the pages, but they all told the same story. Moved to Maple Street today. The house across from us is strange. Something's wrong with 1248. The family who lives there isn't right. I saw them in their yard tonight, but they weren't moving, just standing there. They are not people. I don't know what they are, but they are not people. It's getting harder to remember who I was before I moved here. I can't leave. Every time I try, I end up back at the house. I think I'm becoming one of them. The final entry was in Rebecca's own handwriting, though she had no memory of writing it. "Welcome home, Rebecca. We've been waiting for you." Rebecca ran for the stairs, but they led down into darkness that seemed to have no end. She ran toward what should have been the front door, but found only more hallways, more rooms, stretching endlessly in all directions. From somewhere in the house came the sound of footsteps, multiple sets, all moving toward her. Rebecca hid in what looked like a kitchen and peered around the corner. A family was walking down the hallway. 2 parents and 2 children, all dressed in clothes from different decades. But they moved wrong. Too stiff, too synchronized, like marionettes being controlled by the same puppeteer. Their faces were the same blurred, indistinct features she'd seen in the photographs. "Rebecca," they called in unison, their voices overlapping in an unsettling harmony. "We know you're here. Come meet your new family." Rebecca pressed herself against the kitchen wall, trying not to breathe. Through the window, she could see her own house across the street, warm and inviting. But it seemed impossibly far away. "You can't go back," the family said, and they were closer now. "Once you're here, you stay here, just like all the others." Rebecca looked down at her hands and saw with horror that they were beginning to blur around the edges, becoming indistinct like the faces in the photographs. She was becoming one of them. The next morning, Mrs. Patterson looked out her window and saw Rebecca working in her garden, but something seemed off. Rebecca moved too stiffly, and when she turned to wave, her face was indistinct, as if seen through frosted glass. A for sale sign appeared in Rebecca's yard that afternoon, though no one remembered seeing a realtor put it there. By evening, a new family was looking at the house, a young couple with 2 children, excited about their fresh start in a quiet neighborhood. Mrs. Patterson wanted to warn them about the house across the street, but when she looked at 1248, she saw a normal family home with lights in the windows and a well-maintained yard. She shook her head, wondering why she'd thought there was anything strange about it. After all, it was just another house on Maple Street. But late that night, she thought she could see figures standing motionless in 1248's yard, 5 shapes now instead of 4, all watching the newest residents of the street with faces that couldn't quite be brought into focus.